In 2007, I had the chance for an emotional return to the Falkland Islands for the 25th anniversary pilgrimage. Speaking to veterans that had gone back since the war, they all said it was a positive thing and helped them put some of their ghosts to rest, especially those that were suffering from mental health issues. But I was unsure myself and slightly apprehensive, but I put my name down with Summer 82, along with another veteran from my regiment, and waited to see if we were both successful, as I had already decided I would only go if Edward Scouse Denmark was coming with me. Looking at it from a therapeutic point of view, I took the view that it may be worth the long journey down south, and like the rest of the lads, I waited to see if our names had been pulled from the hat. Plus, going back with a close friend and fellow soldier from my regiment also made it an easier decision. Right from the offset, things became complicated and controversial when the pilgrimage organizers told us that nobody was guaranteed a seat on the plane. Myself and Edward looked into other options of making our own way down to the Falklands, so I decided to make a phone call to RAF Bryce Norton and inquire about the cost to pay for a flight myself with the RAF on one of their flights that are usually half empty. I was pleasantly shocked and stunned when a female operator told me that it would cost me £45. I obviously assumed she was mistaken. I asked several times, and she confirmed that the price was correct and provided me with a telephone number to book the flight. Gobsmacked, I immediately rang Edward. We were both overjoyed at the news, and Edward rang up to book our flight. As the old saying goes, if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. And Eddie rang me back to tell me that he rang the number and was told the cost would be £1,400 each. We were both back to square one. I was very sad, but when Edward told me that if we're civil servants we could still go for £45, I became angry. A civil servant who works in a tax office for argument's sake, who has no connection to the military, can, if they want, fly back to the Falklands for £45. Edward and I and any other Falkland veterans would have to stump up £1,400, which just can't be right by anyone's standards, surely. I immediately contacted the then Veterans Minister, the Right Honourable Derek Twigg at the Ministry of Defence, and my local MP, the Right Honourable John Hutton. Derek Twigg would also be making the trip for the pilgrimage on a different flight. After I had posted this information on my blog, I received a furious, shouty phone call from one of the pilgrimage organisers, who was not very happy and told me I was out of order. I agreed something was very out of order and it was not me, and told him in an equally angry, colourful exchange, the time for being screamed at by sergeant majors was long gone. After I slammed the phone down, it seemed apparent to me that my chances of going back to the Falklands with Samar 82 were dead in the water, as I am typing this in 2016. In an article in the Times newspaper by Catherine Phillip on June 18th, the headline reads, "Widows pay £2,200 to visit Falklands war graves. Things don't seem to have got any better with the passing of time." You can imagine my utter surprise and astonishment when both of our names were eventually chosen for a seat. Edward drove us both to London and the aptly named Union Jack Club, an armed forces club hotel in central London for members and veterans of the British Armed Services. Going through the main doors with my bags, I felt like I was back in the army, as we had to confirm who we were, the usual name, rank, number, regiment, routine. I was just waiting for someone to give me a sweeping brush. The atmosphere was jovial and pleasant, with lots of laughter and backslapping as comrades who had not seen each other for 25 years shared memories, both good and bad, and funny. The larger groups of Scots Guards, Paras and Royal Marines were getting stuck into the bar as per normal. Finding my room, I dropped my bags washed in the shared Victorian bathrooms located in the corridor, which were reminiscent of a military bygone era, and went back down to the bar area and had a couple of beers and a chat with some of the lads from my regiment that were also going back. They seemed very excited and were telling me which Falkland Island families they were staying with. I had decided that I did not want to stay with a family due to my PTSD and nightmares, and felt more comfortable staying in a porter cabin at an army camp. Edward also agreed this was no reflection on the generosity of the islanders, and was a decision based purely on my nighttime outbursts of screaming and shouting in my sleep, which I particularly did not want the young children of these families to witness. Edward left the bar first after about half an hour, and I soon followed him after a couple of beers, missing the entrance of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. I had another terrible night's sleep. Part of me wanted the organizers to say there had been a mistake, and then I could feign annoyance and go home to my partner, Linda, who I had never been apart from since we met. But I tossed and turned, sweating and shouting, realizing I had now committed and I didn't want to let Edward down. Thinking like a serving soldier again, I felt like I had no choice and I had to go, like it or not. It was like doing another army course that I had to pass, and to pass this one I had to get on those buses tomorrow, like the buses that took us to war in 1982 and returned to somewhere that had a detrimental effect and consumed my life negatively for the last 25 years. You have had your orders now, McNally, I thought to myself, so man up and get on with it. Bright and early next morning we were off. It took a couple of hours to take us down the M42 RAF Bryce Norton. The coaches buzzed with exuberant chatter and laughter until some drifted off to sleep off last night's alcohol. I had done many trips like this on buses full of soldiers, Not quite as old in years as this bunch and usually wearing my uniform on occasion carrying a rifle. The nearest I could compare it to was when we went skiing in Germany on Exercise Snow Queen. Another big difference, this time we would be flying with a civilian airline Monarch and not the usual RAF VC-10. Plus, this was a very mixed group of ex-servicemen from all of the branches that shared a common bond. We had all been part of the liberation of the Falklands Islands and were holders of the South Atlantic Medal with Rosette. Compared to the arduous, stomach-churning 8 weeks at sea it took us to get there in 1982, the almost 20 hours with a stop-off in Brazil was luxury. The aircraft had the feel of a holiday flight at times, and we remembered all the good experiences we had together. I started to relax into the whole pilgrimage idea. That was until we were only around 4 hours from our destination, when we were suddenly confronted by an emotional lady holding a photograph album. It was full of photographs of her young son. Tears were streaming down her face as she shows us the pictures. She had them right from when he was a baby up until he became a paratrooper and was killed in action at 17 years of age. All I could do was repeat how sorry I was and somehow try to comfort her by saying how proud she must be of him. But the tears and sobs continued. She showed us photographs of his bedroom with his bed and football posters still on the wall. Exactly the same as it was when he kissed her goodbye and left for the last time. His room was literally a shrine now. This poor lady will never get over the loss of her son, and looking at his tender years, I could understand why. And I thought to myself, at least I spared my own mother having to go through the same grief. Eventually, she moved on to the seats in front of us, and once again, the reality of what we were doing and what we had been involved in hit home. Edward and I sat there in silence and contemplation, like back in 1982 on D-Day, when I climbed on board the Sea King helicopter to go ashore. There was no going back now. We banked to port. There was a strange silence in the aircraft as everyone was for a moment lost in their own personal memories. I heard the clunk of the landing gear lowering. My mouth felt dry and my heart raced. I felt a knot in my stomach. It was like I was looking into a black hole that was sucking me inside as I peered out of the window. As we started our approach, the captain came on the tannoy and gave us all a surprise. It was not the usual altitude, temperature, and time of arrival. It was when he said, "The last time I was flying over here I was dropping bombs on the airfield at Stanley." We were being flown by one of the most famous RAF pilots in RAF history, Martin Withers of Black Buck Mission XM607 fame. I personally felt it was a great honor and a privilege to be on the same aircraft as this man, and knew we were in safe hands. Plus, seeing the RAF tornadoes escorting us in made me feel better. Once I realized they were RAF and not Argentinian. Banking to port, I looked out of my window and caught the first glimpse of the Falklands for 25 years. It was a strange, surreal feeling, hard to describe. It certainly was not the same reaction to when I was about to land for an all-inclusive holiday in Tenerife. It was as if I had gone through a time portal. I was anxious, probably even more so when, as a young soldier 25 years ago, I went ashore. Well, I was a naive 19-year-old then and had no idea what war was, only that it was an adventure that I was happy to be part of. We landed at MPA Mount Pleasant Airport, which Prince Andrew opened on May 12, 1985, 3 years after the war. As the door opened and I exited the plane squinting into the bright blue Falklands Day, the first thing I noticed was the intense cold on my bald head. And this was summer as opposed to the winter months that covered the duration of the fighting. You certainly do feel the cold more when you get older. Well, I do anyway. Even though we were once liberators, we went through the immigration procedure, which is perfectly understandable, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, before heading off to our respective destinations. Mine and Edward's being Hilltop Camp in Stanley. If you're enjoying this, please like, subscribe and share. Read A.A. McNally's book Still Watching Men Burn, Fighting the PTSD War.